Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today, whether it's morning or afternoon for you. We are very excited to be here to talk about a subject, one that's very near and dear to my heart. The title, "What Are You Waiting For?" It's a little direct, it's a little intentional, maybe a little uncomfortable, and that's the point. As most of us are pretty good at checking the boxes when it comes to financial and estate planning with a will or a trust and beneficiary designations. But there's oftentimes a big gap between having those documents and actually talking about them with the people most affected by them.
And that gap is what we're here to address today, not the paperwork, no more planning, the actual conversation. We're going to provide practical tools, real framework, and a language you can actually use. So by the time we're done, you'll be able to take that clear next step and have the confidence to do it. Quick introductions before we start. I'm Erica Tarrenter. I'm a certified financial planner and partner here at Curi Capital. A big portion of my work focuses on helping families navigate the intersection of wealth, relationships, and long-term planning.
And I am Lauren Canaster, also a partner here at Curi Capital. I work out of our Denver office, and I work with families across generations, which means I spend a lot of time thinking about not just how wealth is built, but how it's communicated and ultimately transferred.
So between us, we've sat across the table from a lot of families in a lot of different situations. And one thing we've consistently noticed is that families who navigate these transitions they may not be the most graceful, but they are the ones who are able to have, the ones who navigate this the most gracefully may not have the most sophisticated plans, but they are the ones who talk about it. And that's what we're here today to relay to you.
Okay, so here is how we're going to spend the day together. We'll start with an honest look at why these conversations don't happen, even with families that have done all the right planning work. Then we'll talk specifically about the sandwich generation. If you've heard that term before, you know what we're talking about. If not, it's a growing group that's uniquely positioned and uniquely pressured when it comes to family financial conversations. And then from there, we'll get practical, walking through how to approach aging parents, how to open those conversations with your own children, and what to do if you've been named an executor or financial point person. We'll close with key takeaways and specific next steps that you can act on today, and we will leave questions for the end.
Right. So I want to start with a question, and I'd ask you to sit with it honestly for just a moment. When was the last time you had a meaningful conversation with your family about your estate plan, your wishes for healthcare, your financial support, who would step in during a crisis? Not a passing comment, not an assumption that someone knows what you want, but a real conversation. For most people and most families, the conversation either hasn't happened yet or maybe happened once and hasn't been revisited in many years. And here's the thing. It's not because people don't care. It's almost because it's the opposite. People avoid these types of conversations because they love their family deeply. And the avoidance is a form of protection. And the problem is that ultimately it protects no one. And that's really where we wanted to start today.
Yeah, so let's call it what it is. There's a big myth around estate planning, and it tends to, sometimes get people in trouble. And that myth is if the documents are in order, we're good. The work is done. And it makes sense. We understand why people believe that. Getting the documents right is genuinely hard. It takes time, it takes money, it takes lots of back and forth. Sometimes, 5 or 6 conversations over 5 to 6 bottles of wine, if not more. And when it's done, it feels like it's a huge accomplishment, and it is, but it's only part of the picture. Documents are not communication. A will cannot explain the why behind your decisions. And a trust cannot prepare your children for what they're about to receive. A healthcare proxy cannot tell your family what you actually want if you can't speak for yourself in that moment, unless you've had that conversation in advance. So the three things that derail families most often aren't missing documents, their discomfort, the topic that feels morbid or taboo, assumptions, and people thinking that they know what their families want when they don't. And then a lot of the time it's avoidance. Always a reason to wait until later, not wanting to kind of deal with the problem in the moment and having inertia set in. So the risk is it leaves an estate plan and sometimes an inheritance left to interpret when there could be understanding in the moment. That cost of silence is so real. We've seen estates that were legally airtight create years of family conflict simply because nobody explained the reasoning behind the decisions. And it's such a painful thing to witness. It's really kind of one of the things that pains me most in the world is to see a family that especially is close or siblings who are close, lose that relationship because of conflict that bubbles up, that completely could have been prevented.
Right, so let's talk about a specific group here, one that Lauren previously mentioned, but one that is also probably well represented on the Zoom today. It's the sandwich generation. Adults who are simultaneously supporting aging parents while still raising and launching their own children. They're caught in the middle and pulled both directions at once. And the numbers tell the story. ARP reports that 18 million American adults are supporting both their children and their parents at the same time. This group is typically in their late 30s to their early 60s, which are also peak earning years and correspond and overlap with peak caregiving years. Women bear a disproportionate share of career costs, stepping away from work, reducing hours, and passing up opportunities. The professional toll is real and often invisible. If any of this sounds familiar, you're in that middle layer. You are the meat in the sandwich, and today's conversation is especially relevant for you because you're not just planning for your own future, you're navigating two other generations at the same time, and that makes having these conversations both harder and more urgent.
Yeah, I'm gonna rue that we're talking about the sandwich generation so close to lunch, but I'm going to power through that. Trying to get practical. How do you actually start the conversation with aging parents? Most aging parents today are part of the baby boomer generation, and that's not a generation that is particularly known for being open or vulnerable about anything, let alone finances. So the most common mistake that I think you can make is to lead with some kind of a hard transition or logistics. Don't open the conversation with "Mom, I need to know where all your accounts are and how much is in them." It can feel very transactional, even threatening, like you're already trying to count on what you're going to inherit. So I always like to kind of think about leading with love, leading with empathy and concern. Make it clear that the conversation comes from a place of caring, not planning. So something like I've been thinking about our family. I really just want to make sure I understand your wishes, not because anything is wrong, but I want to be able to honor them if I am ever in a position to help. And then if you can kind of follow that with asking questions rather than making statements, questions like, have you thought about what you'd want if something happened? That's a good way to open a door. Or we need to talk about your will. That's a good way to close the door. So you can kind of see the difference between the two. I think if you focus the conversation on reducing further stress for them and also, for you, and just being very clear that doing so to keep the family, together if there are siblings that potentially, could have their relationship strained in the future. Parents who resist these conversations often respond better when they understand that having this conversation is actually an act of love towards their children. And then I would also say start small. The goal of the first conversation. It's not necessarily to start collecting all the information. It's just a door opener. And the key topics, documents and advisors and healthcare arrangements, all that stuff can come over time across multiple conversations. So a conversation can be very practical. Sometimes, hey, even around, I think about, kind of what we do with multi-generations, and they both like to be planning for their future. So the younger generation could say something like, Mom and Dad, I'm doing my own planning for my family, and I'm trying to make decisions around saving for college and reducing debt. Is there anything I should know that may impact that decision, one way or another? I think that's been a helpful tool in the past. Sorry, Eric, I jumped the gun. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so that's great. You came up with a game plan. You came up with the courage that you needed to approach your parent. They completely resist, shut you down, and they pull back. A very common response. And what happens when they don't want to talk about it? We say don't give up after one try. People process things different ways, and what may originally come off as a very shocking topic may feel easier once the person has a chance to process. Smaller conversations, and sometimes being able to relate to a friend situation, a news story, a health event in the family, natural windows that could gently open doors to the conversation. And it's just good to remember in the back of your mind. If the decision maker doesn't know what happens next, then it's not a plan. And the most beautifully drafted documents in the world are only as effective as the communication around them. So one approach we've seen work really well is bringing in kind of not necessarily a bad guy, but a neutral third party. So an advisor, an attorney, somebody that can facilitate the conversation in a way that it's just creating space that doesn't necessarily already exist between the kid and the parent, to talk about. It's just not a part of natural conversations, and it's really hard to find that intentional space. So, when the time is right, consider. Another tactic is to potentially, if it's just impossible to have that communication face to face for whatever reason, sometimes people find themselves more comfortable being able to express themselves through a letter. So writing a personal letter to your family, not necessarily a legal document, but something that explains the why behind your decisions, so that it can prevent a little bit more conflict than just looking at things through the lens of a legal document.
Yeah, and just a quick add on there, I recently met with a client who's done just that and has 5 sons, and one is going to be the main decision maker across the board. And he wanted to let all the other sons know and his reasoning for his decisions. And so he has included a handwritten letter that that explains his reasons behind the decisions that he made. And so it just is going to ground everyone and down the line and give a window into his decision making, so that hopefully there's no discord or conflict or misunderstandings or tension with the brother who is the decision maker. The father is going to clearly explain that and has clearly explained that in the letter. Okay, so let's go to now, instead of talking up a generation, talking to your children and communicating to the generation behind you. The goal here is to create familiarity before a crisis forces a conversation, because a crisis-driven conversation, whether it be in the hospital, after a death, in the middle of a grieving period, that's the worst version of these types of conversations. It makes everything harder and everyone's less rational, and just the possibility for stress and tension and discord just amplifies. So similarly to what Lauren said, speaking to your parents, here with kids, start small. It does not need to be a formal family meeting. Some of the most effective conversations can happen naturally, whether in the car, over dinner, or something in the news opens a window. I think two things that deserve special attention that I think it's really important to get ahead of and really hear directly from the person who's made the decisions is first, if your decisions appear or just generally, if your decisions appear unequal or unconventional, like explain them while you can. If one child is handling all your decisions as your power of attorney, your executor, your trustee, that's a big, reason to say, hey, this is why I've decided to have this person be serving in these roles for me. Additionally, if the estate's asset division isn't equal, or if one child person has received more in your lifetime than the others, it would be really I think a gift to have that conversation in advance to explain why you've done that. The absence of an explanation is going to likely breed resentment, and even an explanation, while it may not be absolutely perfect, and it's better than no discussion at all. There's a lot more understanding that comes about and time to ask questions and contemplate when you're able to express this yourself rather than having it be interpreted or after the fact. Another suggestion would be is have the conversation as a group so that everyone hears the information at the same time. It removes the perception of favoritism and prevents information from being filtered from one family member to another. Never want to have a game of telephone in this this types of situations, or this mom told me this. One says mom told me this, and the other says mom told me that. If everyone's sitting around the same table, it's a lot easier to say we all heard the same thing. Now, interpretation could be slightly different, but at least you have a grounding point to say we're all together to have this conversation. And one interesting kind of more public situation to kind of drive this point home in terms of like really kind of expressing your thoughts and documenting them before you're gone is the Philip Seymour Hoffman's situation. And this was in the news a bunch, but just wanted to kind of zone in on the thing that we think is most important for this conversation. But as we all know, Philip Seymour Hoffman died, suddenly at age 46, and he left behind 3 children. His girlfriend, not his, who was a life partner, but not officially his wife, was the mother of those 3 children. He had an estate over $35 million, and he left everything to his girlfriend because he did not want to leave his kids and his kids to become trust fund kids. So very literally, he did not want them to have a trust fund, but he also had nothing written down about his point of view as to how wealth should work, and how it would impact his kids' lives. And he said these things and expressed these viewpoints to his advisors, but there was nothing documented, and we uncertain about what he was able to express or what his partner would actually do in the future, just because he was concerned about the term or the concept of a trust fund children. So he trusted that she would know what he wanted and would carry out those wishes, but they weren't documented. And to be honest, it's unclear as to what kind of conversations he had with her. He couldn't talk to his children. They were too young, but it's important to have a conversation with someone who is looking after those children about values, intentions, what kind of people he wanted his children to become. And in a way that could actually be acted on too. So for those of you who are here that have young children, the conversation always isn't with the kids, but it's with either your spouse or the guardians that you name in your will, the person who will be raising those children with you or without you potentially. And they need to understand what, not just what's in the documents or what's in your head, but why. And this is obviously to protect what you want and also protect your children who are too young to have that conversation with directly. So, there's obviously children of different ages, and just wanted to kind of express and talk about what maybe children of different age brackets and age groups, what types of conversations you should start to be having with them. So, obviously, this is not a one-size-fits-all type of answer. So minors and younger children, This isn't about estate documents or technicalities. It's really about values. How does the family think about spending, giving, saving? Why does generosity matter? What role does work play in your family's lives? And so you're planting the seeds to make future conversations easier. For younger adults, I'm thinking adults that are kind of starting to get graduated college or started their working years early on. They're starting to become financially independent. The conversation shifts to incorporating these values into their own lives. What does a healthy relationship look like with money? How do they, if they, how does what they'll eventually inherit fit into a life they're building themselves? And what documents should they have, even as young, income earners or, young adults? What documents should they be having? And so you can kind of merge those conversations. It's really important that you look and you start to think about maybe naming someone as your power of attorney. If you're not married, you want to make sure your parents or, someone else you trust is able to speak for you if you can't. Who should you name as beneficiaries on your first 401k? You can all link this and make this into a blended conversation about them and make it applicable and relatable to themselves, but also start to talk and offer information about your own plan. And then, of course, for the people that you've named in documents, the decision makers, this is where it's important to get specific. They need to know what roles they've been given. The executor needs to understand what it actually means when they're called upon to do it. And, a healthcare proxy needs to understand your actual wishes. It's better that you should definitely let anyone know who's named in these documents that they are there. It would be an awful surprise to know that you are suddenly lifted into one of these really important positions without knowing it, but also, expressing your wishes and giving some context to why you name them and what you would like them to do for you when they do have to step into those roles. So regardless of age, your children should know how you envision your own future as you age and your care preferences, your healthcare wishes, and how you want the decisions to be made if you couldn't make them for yourself. And that conversation is the gift that you're giving them. It removes the burden of guessing from the people who love you most. And just like lastly here, notice that we haven't talked about money today, like account balances, asset lists, who gets what. These conversations are about something more important, and you don't have to get into the dollars and cents of it all. It's really about the values, the roles that your loved ones play, and making your wishes known while you're fully able to express them.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. Just a reminder, everybody, we do have a chat box. If you have questions, feel free to go into the chat and send them to us. Hopefully, we have a few minutes to answer them at the end. We'll talk next about what happens if you are one of those major responsibilities, if you're the executor or another one of those roles that Erica mentioned. I'd say first off, take that responsibility very seriously. Being an executor is an honor, which is great, but it is also a legal responsibility and it can involve months of work. It can involve navigating probate and the court system, communicating with multiple beneficiaries, managing assets, and making really difficult decisions at an already very emotional time. So yay. Thank you for, naming me this responsibility. Mom and Dad, I'm so, happy that you think that I'm the, responsible one of the siblings. There's some serious stuff that comes behind that. And here's what we'd encourage you to do before you're ever called upon. So one, know where the documents are. Have a conversation with the person who named you, not to just understand what's on paper, but again, as we keep coming back to this concept, understand the why, understand their wishes, their values, and the reasoning behind their decisions. So you have that context, and that context is what will guide you when things get difficult, if they do. We think it's a great idea to keep a current list of key professional contacts. Financial advisors being one, especially if it's a central advisor acting kind of as the overall point person for all of their financial relationships. That's obviously a big one. Attorneys and accountants for sure as well. Check in with those people periodically. Those relationships matter enormously when you're navigating an estate. Don't try to do it alone. Rely on those professionals. It's not a sign that you can't handle the responsibility. It's what the person who trusted you with the responsibility would have wanted. The best executors that we've worked with are the ones who ask early and often for help. And that can go a long way. And again, as Erica mentioned, this is just another area ripe for good communication. If there's a family with multiple siblings and all of the siblings, no matter how many there are expecting that they're going to be the point person at a key time, it's probably better to have that conversation as a parent while you're alive so you can kind of communicate to your children why you've picked a certain person or why you've picked somebody to have shared responsibilities, and it's not left to create kind of some bitter feelings when it's too late.
All right, well, let's wrap it up and then we'll head to Q&A. Everything we covered here today points back to a few simple truths. One, documents themselves are not enough. The legal framework certainly matters, but it only works when the people around it understand it, we're part of it, and have context for the decisions within it. Start small. You don't have to go in charging like a bull to have these conversations. You don't need a formal meeting. You don't have to have everything figured out. Just that opening conversation to open up that small window to continue the conversations down the line. Ideally, you don't wait for a crisis, and we never know when a crisis may hit. So this is hopefully getting you thinking, I should have this sooner rather than later because I don't know when that next situation is going to arise. But again, this crisis will only make the conversation harder. It's going to be more emotionally, financially, relationally fraught. And so if you can avoid the conversations in those highly charged moments, you are reducing risk of that challenging situation. And silence creates risk. And it's not malicious. No one's doing anything intentionally, but it's truly a risk. The families that we've seen struggle most are the ones who haven't necessarily planned poorly. It's just they maybe have planned privately or just really haven't had these bigger conversations that are ultimately going to impact a much greater group. Unfortunately, the line I've heard a little too often is, well, I'm not going to be here, so they can handle it. And I kind of cringe when I hear that because I know, well, I'm going to be here. I have to help. But it's just ultimately not leaving your family in the best position to move forward after such an emotional time, your death. And, they're going to be in a period of grief-stricken period. And it's just much more of a positive situation and a gift if you can have these conversations and not leave someone questioning or curious as to what your intentions were. And big takeaway is the most valuable estate planning conversation is the one you actually have. No one's expecting anyone to be perfect, or it's not going to be necessarily smooth, but anything you can start to kind of have the start of having a conversation, express yourself, is going to be the most valuable. And hopefully there could be multiple iterations of it, but open dialogue is the way to having the most valuable conversation with your family.
Yeah, there's actually research, behavioral finance research that shows that people behave much differently with money they've earned versus money they've inherited. And oftentimes it's money that they've inherited that creates way more anxiety, way more strange feelings around risk or paralysis by analysis because there's such expectation and sometimes unknown expectation that comes from inheriting something that was once a parent's or a beloved family member or something like that. So thank you for kind of listening to us. We have a few minutes for Q&A. If anybody has any questions, I see a couple popping into the chat. So what documents should I make sure my family knows about? Where should they be stored? So we've talked about a few of those. The big ones, wills, trusts, healthcare powers of attorney, and financial powers of attorney, I think rise to the top of the list. You want to make sure that you've got access to those. I would hope that that access is electronic and not just saved onto one computer. This is another great way to use your advisors because they can act as a data backup for you. If in case you need it, you lose a binder, you lose something, or you're traveling, but you have a professional that's able to kind of keep all your documents in one place, and everybody knows to find that professional. That's always a good thing. Okay, what else we've got? Erica, how about you take this one? How often should I review or update my estate plan?
Sure. Well, I don't think that there's any type of prescribed time frame. Is essentially what I would say every certain number of years you should think about or review it. I think some big triggering events would be, and on the personal side, if there's been a big life change, whether it be births, deaths, a change in your a significant change in your financial situation. If there's some family dynamics, whether it be marriages or divorces, those are all things that have some implications to your estate plan. So I would certainly say any kind of life event that is meaningful, or a big windfall through a successful employment situation, things that would change your financial picture, whether for tax purposes or how you think of things. I would say that's a really good time. Additionally, things like related to just more like tax laws, they don't happen often, but there are reasons why tax laws, whether at the federal or your individual state level, may warrant a look at your current documents to see that, make sure that they're in a good place going forward. So I would suggest it kind of in those events rather than every certain number of years. Although, if you're getting over 10 years on a set of documents, I would say it's probably worth a conversation, at least with your advisor, like Lauren and I, and say, hey, I just wanted to, what do you think? These were, I did these 10 plus years ago. Do you think they're still in good shape? And then we can kind of advise, say, yeah, probably good, or, might be worth a shot, a ping to the attorney to see if there's anything that they recommend. So that would be my advice on that question.
Awesome. Okay, I think that does it for the questions. So we can wrap up.
Yeah. So if anything comes out of a conversation to add, spur thoughts for anyone who's listening today, please feel free to reach out to us. This is what we're here for. We want to have these kind of conversations, navigate maybe some more challenging situations for you, game plan, maybe be that neutral person sitting at the table to help facilitate those conversations. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us or any advisor at Curi Capital.
Okay, thank you everybody for
Thank you
joining
for your
us,
time
and
today.
yeah, have a good rest of your day.
Bye-bye.